Hello, my name is Colin Channer. I am a poet, fiction writer, and occasional essayist, and I'm a faculty member in the Department of Literary Arts at Brown. My art practice started in a very unconventional way. I grew up in Jamaica in the 1970s when reggae was on the ascendancy, and I became fascinated by reggae lyrics. I was fascinated by the way in which reggae could be simultaneously political, highly literary, how it was rooted in the poetics of Jamaican English, patois, you know, Jamaican, but also the ways in which it was simultaneously political, history engaged, philosophical, and could be absurd and silly. So I began writing little lyrics. I was very awful at sports. I have very bad vision. So lacking good hand-eye coordination, I was accidentally blessed with a little bit of good subject-verb agreement. So I was very much a reader very early, and like most writers, um, I started out as a reader. So essentially, I'm a fan who became a professional. Race and ethnicity factor into my practice, one, because of my embodiment. And I think, like many writers, the self becomes part of a subject. Um, and for me in particular, I write a lot about travel, about what it means to be intentionally displaced as a voluntary traveler, but also what it means to be involuntarily displaced, for example, in the case of refugees or in the case of immigrants who don't have lots of agency. The questions of race and ethnicity also play into my fundamental interest in language, because languages exist um, along various continuums. One can think about, for example, just how many Englishes there are and how those versions of English are politically implicated. But also these versions of English also present us with a fascinating array of sonics. And so for me, especially when I'm writing in poetry, the availability of Englishes inflected by the history of the world, especially the Western world, including enslavement, becomes part of an aesthetic practice. Well, the role of art in challenging times, I think, is to keep going. There's a poem in the forthcoming book called, the name of the poem is Aftermath. And in that poem, I begin by looking at photographs of devastating floods in Providence during the 1950s. And I then turn to growing up in Jamaica, and every year there was a hurricane season, a storm season, and how being inside the house locked up became a kind of womb of imagination, right? You're hearing things outside and you're imagining what's going on out there. And the last line of the poem says, what the way in which I understood aftermath, because this is written from the perspective of the 10-year-old, is counting one's blessings after the wrath was done, right? And so what art does in times of crisis and difficult times, it gives us an opportunity to do the calculus of what is also good, of what is also working. So I think art gives us, for the writer, art brings solace. Art brings also opportunity to be inventive. But I think for the person on the other side of the art, who is what one would call the general public, the engagement with art it's foundationally a spiritual practice. It's foundationally a metaphysical practice. Imagine this, right? Someone is away from me. Neither of us are telepathic, yet somehow I'm able to generate into that person's consciousness. right? A great deal of what I'm thinking. The part that I can't communicate is their own construction, right? To me, that's that's magnificent, and that is so deeply human. The things that surprised me about my career and life experiences that one would ever take me seriously. I grew up in Jamaica again. I grew up at a time when music was such a robust and almost singular artistic force. So the idea of being a writer was so ridiculous. I mean, to think of being a writer in Jamaica in the 1970s was as ridiculous as, let's say, thinking of becoming an Olympian bobsledder. You know, possible, but long odds, right? So the idea that I can have a career or that I would write anything than anybody but um, my friends pressured into reading my work would read. That surprises me incredibly. I've also been surprised by the way in which the world is so big. And as soon as one begins to think that, yes, I've got it, I understand it now, right? That the world itself surprises. The world surprises through the range of art that's there. And when one thinks about the range of art that's there, let us think about how in the last 20 years, the ways in which the art and the arts of people of color has moved more in larger numbers and with more power for the margins toward the center. Just think of, just um, uh, institutional diversity now. Just think of, curators in museums, thinking of, painters um, with gallerists and whose work is being collected by museums. Thinking of, cinema, for example. Just think of the range of cinema being produced by a wider range of people. That is not something I think I could have predicted. Because I mean, the systemic structures were so entrenched and so strong. That is a wonderful surprise for me. If I were stranded and there was a piece of art or literary work that I would want to have, I would want to have the collected poetry of Kwame Dawes. Kwame Dawes is a fascinating poet. His range of aesthetics, the depth of his concerns, the way in which he epitomizes honesty and vulnerability as part of the craft. I know him personally, and yet I'm still in awe of him. Yeah, the collected works of Kwame Dawes. I wish that the world would double down, triple down, and quadruple down on what it means to be essentially human. I think we've never fully engaged that outside of our own tribes, and I think that's something I wish for us to really and truly, quadruple down on the recognition and engagement with what it means to be human.